It felt like love. The kind that grips your chest and doesn't let go. The kind that makes the world go quiet when they walk into the room. The kind that reawakens the parts of you you thought had died long ago. You thought it was real. You told yourself it had to be, because nothing else had ever felt that intense, that consuming, that alive. But now that they're gone, and the noise has settled, and the high has crashed into silence, you're left with a question that burns more than the heartbreak itself. Was it ever really love? And Carl Jung would ask you to look deeper. Because maybe it wasn't love at all. Maybe it was a need disguised as love. Maybe what you called love was your nervous system recognizing something familiar. Maybe it was your trauma-craving resolution. Maybe it was your inner child screaming for the presence, protection, and validation they never got. Maybe you didn't love them. Maybe you needed them. We confuse the two all the time. Need wears the mask of love. It shows up in longing, in obsession, in intensity. It speaks in the language of "I can't live without them." It creates urgency, desperation, dependency. And because we've been taught to equate intensity with intimacy, we call that need love. But love, real love, is not desperate. It's not chaotic. It's not built on anxiety and fear of loss. It doesn't require the other person to constantly fill a void you've been carrying since childhood. Jung believed that we are drawn to people who reflect our unconscious selves, that our strongest attractions are not random, but purposeful. He said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed." But not all transformation is healing. Sometimes it's a reenactment. Sometimes what you felt with them wasn't love at all. It was your unconscious trying to resolve an old wound. Maybe they reminded you subtly, silently, of the parent who never really saw you. Maybe they made you feel small in a way that echoed the powerlessness of your earliest relationships. Maybe their inconsistency mirrored the love you had to earn growing up. So when they gave you attention, it lit something inside of you. Not because they were the one, but because you were still trying to be the one your younger self never got to be. Chosen, seen, loved for simply existing. Jung called this the process of projection, when we unknowingly cast parts of ourselves onto others. And most of what we call love at first sight is actually a projection at first wound. You didn't fall in love with them. You fell in love with the version of yourself you imagined you could finally be in their presence. The one who would finally be enough. Need isn't evil, it's human. But it becomes dangerous when we don't recognize it for what it is. When we place the responsibility for our healing into the hands of another. When we confuse the ache of the past with the pull of the present. When we tether our sense of safety to the way someone else treats us. And need, unchecked, leads to self-abandonment. You start bending your boundaries to keep them close. You silence your needs to avoid conflict. You become the version of yourself you think they'll stay for, rather than the version that's true. And then you say, well, I love them. But love rooted in fear is not love. It's survival. It's your inner child begging to feel safe. That's why it felt so intense. That's why their absence feels like suffocation. Because they didn't just leave. You lost the person who was carrying the illusion of your healing. They became the symbol of everything you wanted to believe. That if someone stayed, you would finally be okay. That if someone chose you, you'd finally be worthy. That if someone loved you, you'd finally feel whole. But no one else can give you what you refuse to give yourself. No one else can fix the parts of you you've abandoned. And when they leave, you don't just grieve them, you grieve the parts of yourself you pinned to their presence. You grieve the hope that this time love would save you. So how do you know if it was love or need? Start here. When they hurt you, did you speak up or stay silent, afraid they'd walk away? When they pulled away, did you feel grief or panic? Did you love them for who they were or for how they made you feel about yourself? Did you feel free in the connection or bound to their moods, their attention, their approval? Love nurtures, it empowers, it expands. Need contracts, it clings, it manipulates, often without realizing it. Jung taught that we are not truly free until we become conscious of what drives us. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So many of us keep chasing the same kind of person in a different body. The emotionally unavailable, the unpredictable, the ones who make us work for love. Not because we're foolish, but because our trauma is familiar. And we call that familiarity destiny, but it's not fate, it's a pattern. And patterns break the moment you start asking the right questions. Why did I need them so badly? What story was I trying to rewrite through this connection? What part of me still believes I'm only lovable when I'm chosen? You may never get the answers you thought you needed from them, but you don't need them. You need you. The version of you that doesn't chase love that hurts. The version of you that doesn't shrink to be accepted. The version of you that knows love isn't meant to complete you, it's meant to meet you. And until you meet yourself, truly, wholly, without condition, you'll keep mistaking need for love. It's a hard truth to face, because we want to believe we loved them, that the story was real, that it meant something. And it did, but not because they were your forever. It meant something because it revealed what you still long for. It showed you the parts of yourself you've silenced. It pointed you toward the healing you still need. They were the mirror, the trigger, the catalyst, but they were not the cure. So what now? You grieve, not just the person, not just the shared moments, but the narrative you were trying so desperately to make true. You mourn the version of the relationship you held onto in your mind long after reality had already started to unravel. You feel the ache not only for them, but for the part of you that clung to them like salvation. You grieve the self you became just to feel worthy of staying in their orbit. You grieve the illusion of love that was rooted not in connection, but in compensation for every unmet need, every invisible wound, every childhood moment where you had to fight for affection. You sit with the emptiness, not as an enemy, but as an opening. A space that has always been there beneath the noise, beneath the clamor for attention, beneath the emotional scrambling you mistook for passion. It's not a void, it's a clearing. A sacred silence that is asking to be met, not filled. And in that silence, something begins to stir, not desperation, but presence. You stop looking to be saved because now you understand. The savior you were waiting for was not a person. It was a deeper relationship with yourself. You stop outsourcing your healing. You stop hoping someone else will do the emotional labor you've been avoiding. You stop waiting for someone to come into your life and say, I'll never leave you, because now you know that promise means nothing if you're still leaving yourself. You begin to stay with your sadness, with your memories, with the ache that rises in your chest and makes you want to run. You stay with the parts of you that were never chosen by your caregivers, your past lovers, or by yourself. You learn to sit in the room with your own inner child and say, I see you. I know why you're afraid. I know why you clung to them, and I'm not going anywhere. You begin to give yourself what you once begged for in others: presence, patience, permission to be fully human. You begin to understand that the deepest form of love isn't butterflies or grand gestures. It's not someone texting you back fast enough. It's not passion that borders on obsession. It's not feeling high one moment and discarded the next. Because real love doesn't spike your nervous system, it regulates it. It doesn't put you on edge, it puts you at ease. It doesn't challenge your worth, it confirms it. Real love is safe. Real love is steady. Real love whispers, even when you're messy, I stay. And until you learn how to say that to yourself, you will continue to confuse anxiety for desire. You'll mistake emotional roller coasters for emotional connection. You'll keep chasing partners who feel familiar, not because they're healthy, but because they echo the very dynamics you're trying to outgrow. Carl Jung believed that healing is not about perfection. It's about integration, the process of becoming whole by reclaiming the fragmented, disowned parts of ourselves. Not just the light, not just the parts we like to show the world, but also the shame, the fear, the unhealed need, the voice that says, I'm only lovable when I'm useful, when I'm pretty, when I'm quiet. These parts don't disappear just because you ignore them. They live on as projections. They live on in the people you fall for, the people who awaken your deepest longings, the people who trigger your oldest wounds. And unless you bring those parts home, unless you recognize and reintegrate what you've been trying to find in others, you'll continue to be magnetized to relationships that are not rooted in love, but in lack. You'll stay locked in cycles that feel spiritual, but are actually psychological, old dynamics dressed up in new skin. But once you begin this inner work, something subtle begins to shift. You start to feel uncomfortable around chaos. You stop craving the high of being chosen and start craving the quiet of being understood. You stop clinging to people who destabilize you and start noticing how good it feels to breathe in your own space, to trust your own gut, to stand in your own worth. You begin to recognize love that feels calm. And yes, to your trauma, calm might feel boring. But to your soul, it feels like safety. It feels like home. It feels like truth. So no, maybe you didn't love them, not in the purest sense. Maybe you needed them. Needed what they symbolized, needed the emotional salve they temporarily provided. And that's not something to be ashamed of. That's something to learn from. Because now you see clearly. Now you're awake. Now you don't have to keep calling pain your purpose. You don't have to keep calling heartbreak your identity. You don't have to keep telling the story that this is what love feels like. Because now you know better. Now you begin again, not with them, but with you. The you who is learning to stay present in discomfort. The you who is healing generational wounds by choosing not to repeat them. The you who doesn't need to be rescued anymore because you've become the one who listens, the one who nurtures, the one who remains when everything else falls away. This is what Jung meant when he said the path to wholeness is not in chasing the ideal self, but in turning toward the parts of us we've abandoned, the scared parts, the ashamed parts, the hungry parts. When you learn to sit with those parts, to hold them gently instead of handing them to someone else to fix, you start to redefine what love really means. Love is not intensity. Love is not confusion. Love is not trying harder to be good enough. Love is a quiet, consistent return to yourself. And the greatest love you will ever feel is not the one that finally makes you forget your pain. It's the one that teaches you how to hold it with tenderness, with truth, with unshakable presence. That love begins the moment you stop trying to earn it and start giving it. That love begins the moment you stop needing them to see you and start seeing yourself. That love begins when you stop asking, why didn't they choose me? And start asking, why did I abandon myself to keep them? Because real healing isn't when they come back. It's when you come back to you and you stay, no matter what.